Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. For those of you that don't know me or haven't met me before, my name is Keith Taylor. I'm the content guru here at Zerto. I actually work within the evangelism team here, all part of product marketing. Today we're going to be looking at consolidations, mergers, and cloud in particular, and really this all comes under the broader banner of application mobility, as we've termed it here. Just as a quick note on this terminology, actually, you'll see up the top there, mobility, portability, migrations, and moves. Now, a lot of these words are really interchangeable. The whole topic of what we're talking about today is really the ability to have your data, information, and applications where you need them, when you need them. And however we want to term that, and you'll probably find as we go through this today, I suspect I'll use a lot of these words interchangeably, they're all really the same thing. Okay, we're going to cover off a few specific areas today. We're going to look at some of the drivers behind migrations. We'll focus on 3 areas in particular. And we'll look at some of the barriers to portability as well. We're actually going to include all of those under those the 4 C's that you can see there: compatibility, complexity, choice, and confidence. And then in closing, we're also going to actually cover off a customer story as well. And we'll give you a real live example of one of our customers that has done actually a very large project that really centers around a lot of the points that we're going to discuss today. If you do have any questions throughout the course of the webinar, you should have access to a questions window within the GoToWebinar control panel. Please feel free to drop any questions in there as you come up with them. I'm afraid it is actually just me on the line today, so we won't be able to address those questions during the call. If I see something that pops up as we're going through, I'll try to address it. And if we have time at the end, I will go through a Q&A to pick up on some of those. If we don't get the chance to do that, please don't worry. Any questions you do send through, I will address directly back to you later on today or tomorrow. So just to kick things off then, as I say, why do we need to migrate data? We're going to be focusing on these 3 areas today in particular. There can be a lot of other reasons why you need to have a certain amount of portability with your applications. But as I say, we want to focus around these 3 areas, which is where we see a lot of the use cases at the moment. So we're going to look at site consolidations, so reducing the physical footprint of IT operations. It's a great way to be able to reduce costs and to simultaneously streamline operations as well. Maybe relocating processes or applications from remote sites, centralizing them, just looking at ways to improve efficiency, accessibility, and productivity within the organization. Acquisitions and mergers. Now, many businesses choose to really accelerate growth through acquisition, but in doing that, you can end up with multiple disparate infrastructures, which are really each supporting their own siloed units. And successfully scaling a business in that way really requires the ability to actually be able to integrate each acquired entity into the larger organization to help with unify operations across the board. And the last area that we're going to be sort of focusing on today is cloud adoption. Cloud adoption is perhaps arguably the biggest trend in IT and certainly as well one of the biggest drivers of migration projects at the moment. And it's not just about businesses moving to the cloud, and in fact, perhaps ironically, actually knowing how to move out of the cloud is more important. For a lot of businesses, if they feel that they're going to go in and get stuck, it actually will stop them from looking at that migration strategy in the first place. So the importance of being able to go in and out of the cloud at will, having a true hybrid IT setup is really the best way to enable agility within the business. So a slightly light-hearted note then, just to sort of kick things off here. I think this is probably a statistic that I'll use the word statistic loosely actually, that most people are familiar with. 100% of data center migrations are a pain in the ass. It's very broad-ranging topic, but it really is quite true. This is actually a report or a quote I came across in a Server Central report there as well. Just a slight side note, as you might imagine, trying to find an image to represent a pain in the ass is an absolute minefield. I had so many opportunities for, should we say, politically incorrect images, but hey, I figured we can't go wrong with the Lion King. But what we're going to hopefully do by the end of today is show you that this does not have to be the case. Every data center migration can actually be very, very easy when we look at approaching it in the right way. But let's drill down into this in a little bit more of a realistic sense. Why are data center migrations such a problem? In research from Gartner, IDC, and 451 Group, we can see that 50% of migration projects actually run over budget, they run over the allocated time frame, and they result in disruption to the business, which is absolutely not what you're looking for. It's quite the opposite, in fact. 60% of companies, once they've actually gone through the planning phases for a migration, subsequently have delayed it. And of those companies who have delayed, 50% of them cited downtime or concerns about downtime as really as the cause for that. We can actually extend this out. There are some additional supporting figures that go with this, again, all to do with companies that have delayed their migrations here. So 50% cited concerns about downtime, 40% cited a lack of resources, 20% said that even after going through the planning phase, the actual migration itself lacked a plan. Another 20% cited a lack of expertise, actually having the in-house skills to be able to carry out these migrations, and 15% cited cost as well. And funnily enough, that actually fits very, very neatly in with what we see in the market here at Zerto as well. And these really are the barriers that we're going to be looking at focusing on today. So as I mentioned, we've sort of conveniently here bundled these into the 4 C's, if you will: compatibility, complexity, choice, and confidence. And we'll go through each of these pieces individually, and then we'll talk a little bit as well about how Zerto can help to address the concerns there. So first of all, just looking at compatibility here, we're talking about infrastructure compatibility and the ability to seamlessly connect environments, potentially across any distance, and as I said at the start there, to be able to move your data, information, applications, or even entire sites at will and have what you need, where you need it, when you need it. The second barrier that's often found is complexity. And even if you have compatibility within your infrastructure, it doesn't necessarily mean that the migration is actually going to be an easy thing to do. As we saw there, having the necessary skills and expertise to complete these large move operations, including all of the manual workload that goes around with behind that, and actually rebuilding the applications in the target site, it's essential but very, very difficult. A lot of the time migrations can be quite rare incidents. Sorry, excuse me, getting tongue-tied. And for some people, you might find that it's actually a once-in-a-lifetime event. I think that's probably starting to change now. I think people are getting used to being more agile, and they're starting to see these projects come up more and more frequently, maybe on a smaller scale. It might not be an entire site, an entire data center, but particularly with looking at cloud adoption and things like that, we see a lot of selective movement as well. And speaking about the cloud there, this is going to lead us into choice. And although choice applies to the on-premises side of things as well, I am really going to focus on looking at that in the context of the cloud today. Moving workloads to the cloud sometimes can be seen as almost relinquishing control of them. And in turn, it can leave people with a certain amount of insecurity, and they just wonder, have I made the right choice? You've got a lot of options out there nowadays, so how do you know that is going to be the right one for you? And the last bit, of course, really that encompasses all of these points is confidence. And that really is ultimately the big question: will that migration work? The danger of having extended downtime to mission-critical applications, the subsequent loss of productivity, and of course the cost of that, is enough to stop businesses from actually starting these projects before they even begin. And so hopefully we'll be able to look at all of these points and show you today how you can begin to address these and actually make your life a lot easier for any large-scale sort of mobility migration projects, portability projects, so a lot of interchangeable terms here, that you might have. So let's look at compatibility in a little bit more detail first of all. In particular, what we see here is a lot of hardware dependency, storage and servers. Many solutions that are able to move data are reliant on basically having the same hardware in both sites. You essentially need to have a like-for-like environment. If you don't have that already, that can be very costly to actually implement, and especially as it's going to be on probably a temporary basis. The alternative sometimes to that is really just to do sort of a mass lift and shift, which again can really defeat the point of particularly moving towards sort of the software-defined data center. It's not ideal by any means. Of course, you also have, with a lot of solutions, additional appliances that are required as well. So it may just be that you're going to need to purchase some additional physical appliance to enable that data movement as well. In some cases, that can be to sort of try and help you get around the hardware dependency, but when you've still got to put something else in, you've got to have extra expenses on top, it still kind of defeats the point a little bit there. And on the flip side of that, not just the hardware, but actually the platforms in your environments as well, particularly looking at hypervised clouds here. You know, if you're in a VMware environment and you want to be able to migrate out of that, or perhaps you've been acquiring some smaller businesses and actually they've been using Hyper-V as a virtualization platform instead, actually unifying all of those can be very difficult. And the same goes again for the cloud. Again, be it perhaps Microsoft Azure, Amazon Web Services, IBM Cloud, or any others, you need to be able to have unification at the virtualization layer as well there. And that can actually go down to the point of being very version specific. So it might be that, okay, you've got vSphere in site A and site B, but if you're running 5.1 somewhere down there and you're running 6.5 in the other side, that's not going to be compatible. You're still going to have to put in a lot of manual intervention to actually bring those sites up to an even speed and enable the seamless transfer of data across there as well. So how can we look to address the compatibility issues? I've kind of given you a few hints there already. If you're not familiar already with Zerto Virtual Replication, we are primarily at the core of the technology a disaster recovery solution, but the way that we enable the underlying data movement is very unique, very clever, and this has opened up a huge range of additional use cases for us. Obviously, migration is what we're going to be focusing on today, but you'll probably see as we go through some of the rest of the slides as well that you'll probably be able to piece together some other use cases for just some of the features that we're going to discuss. So by all means, just keep that in the back of your head as we go through today. So the first bit there, obviously going from any storage to any storage, we're looking at removing that physical dependency. Zerto does not depend on any physical storage or servers. You can replicate from any array to any array. So immediately you've got a huge amount of flexibility there from a hardware point of view. Similarly, at the virtualization layer, we enable replication between vSphere and Hyper-V, and that also extends out to different versions of those so that you don't have to, as I said before, bring everything up to a synchronous point in time necessarily and go through all of that additional management and planning beforehand. It really just makes the whole process a lot easier to actually manage. Looking at the cloud there, we can also enable replication to Azure, to AWS, and to IBM clouds. In fact, with our last release, 5.5, we also included, we actually provided support for bidirectional replication for Microsoft Azure. So not only now can we replicate you into Azure, you've also got the ability to actually protect workloads in the cloud and actually have that replicated back out to an on-premises environment as well. We're looking at extending that facility out to some of the other clouds. It is available manually, but it's a little bit more awkward than we would like at the moment. But that's something that we're really working on very heavily at the moment, is extending that level of automation for Azure out to some of the other public cloud providers as well. And for those of you that are perhaps not looking at using public cloud, we also have a huge cloud service provider network. We have over 350 managed service providers that utilize Zerto Virtual Replication, a lot of them to provide draft services for customers. And we have some licensing changes coming in as well, actually. So for those of you who are owning licenses, Zerto licenses, and are perhaps looking at using a CSP at some point in future, we might well have some interesting news coming out for you there in the next few months as well. So all of this enables really a great deal of flexibility in terms of preparing the environment for migration, and can actually eliminate whole steps from the planning process as well there. So it really does make it a lot easier to actually start to bring the infrastructure together and to create that base layer in planning to make sure that your transitions are actually sort of smooth and seamless there. If we look onto the next barrier that we were talking about here, complexity. So if we look at data and application integrity, first of all here, today's Tier 1 applications, they typically consist of multiple VMs that might well exist across various hosts and data stores or even clusters and arrays. Migrating those applications, particularly when they're spread out like that, can be extremely risky. You've got a lot of potential for data loss in there if all of the individual VMs that make up that application aren't replicated in sync, basically. Similarly, you've got an awful lot of opportunities for corruption at the other end when you look to actually bring these back up as well. That sort of complex distribution of workloads is quite tricky to manage sometimes, but as we'll come on in a minute, we have a particular feature, virtual protection groups, that really makes it very, very easy to manage multi-VM, multi-tiered applications wherever they reside, and you can extend that out into, as I say, into the migration and into the move processes as well here. And sort of linking onto that, the lack of skills and expertise as well. They are incredibly huge and complex projects, migrations. They can take weeks to plan or days and even weeks sometimes as well just to actually execute. So we saw a lack of skills was one of those major barriers in that research statistics that we looked at earlier to actually enabling migrations. Now, a lot of that comes from the complexity of rebuilding. With the VPG facility, however, so we'll come on to this a bit more in a moment, it really does a lot of that for you. It takes off all of the manual steps, actually automates and orchestrates that, makes it much, much easier for people to actually manage the project as well. As I mentioned, these can be very rare events. I think they're probably becoming a little bit more frequent now with some of the new trends that we see for mobility. And sometimes it's just new technologies that can actually make life difficult as well. You know, we've seen quite a bit, less so I think this year, but certainly over the last couple of years, where cloud has really become more and more prominent. There haven't been a great deal of people available who have experience in looking at particularly large-scale migration projects to the cloud. You know, everybody is kind of in the same boat, almost starting off from scratch here. And in that sort of sense, it can obviously be very difficult. You know, you're on a learning curve, you will make mistakes, but anything you can do to simplify that is obviously going to help you out a lot in a great deal in the long run as well. So looking at this a little bit further, we say simplifying these processes. So as I mentioned, we have what we call virtual protection groups, within Zerto. These are essentially consistency grouping mechanisms. And as I mentioned, this enables you to basically encapsulate an entire application, multi-VMs, regardless of where those VMs are stored. And what this does is it ensures right order fidelity across that application, so that when you, for example, if we're doing a move in this case, when we need to close that application down and actually transfer that across to the new target site, the VPG automates a huge amount of the processes in there as well. So things like your boot ordering, reconfiguring for IP addresses and things like that. If you've got any sort of particular custom scripts that you might want to run in there as well, you can certainly add those in. So it really takes a huge amount of not just the workload, but the risk out of things as well here. Actually, rebuilding applications can be one of the most difficult tasks of any sort of migration, and this actually applies to disaster recovery scenarios as well when you have failovers. And for any of you who are aware of the incident with British Airways earlier this year, actually, although the initial cause of that started out as a power surge, one of the major problems they had that extended the downtime into the 2, 3, 4 day mark was the recovery of applications. That they basically lost consistency across their applications at the recovery site, and it took them a long time and a lot of manual effort to actually rebuild those and get those up to scratch again. So the VPG facility, as I say, the level of automation and orchestration there really helps to simplify the process, take out a lot of that manual workload. And in fact, just initiating the move, we've done the same thing with that as well. And it really is 4 clicks to move. It's simply a case of basically pairing your sites together, select your data store that you want to move everything to, select the VPGs that you want to move, and click the button, and away it all goes. And as I say, all of the individual steps within that will be automated for you to make this as quick and as seamless as possible. As you see, that all helps to, say, reduce the risk of errors overall, be it technical errors or human error as well. It's obviously less ideal, but it does happen, shall we say. But if we now move on to looking at choice, and as I mentioned, really the focus here is cloud, and which cloud is right for me. How do you know that you have made the right decision? So workload performance, particularly if you're looking at running production applications in the cloud, this is a major concern. You don't know how things are going to perform necessarily until you've actually got it in there and you've got or your users actually linked into it. So really, as with many digital transformation projects, and in this sort of case, digital transformation is a very, very broad term, but there are plenty of reasons to be looking at migrations, moves as part of a digital transformation project, but those are often designed to improve end user experiences. So obviously, if you're going to be creating or adding additional latency, for example, to the application and decreasing the user experience, it's exactly the opposite of what you want. You also have well, should we put this, looking at optimizing distribution here, and what I really mean is looking at the distribution of your workloads across sites. So this might be that you're using on-premises sites, this might be that you're looking at using one cloud, or it might be multiple clouds as well. You may find that some workloads will perform better in one cloud than in another, but the trouble is it's kind of a catch-22 situation. Unless you try it, you really don't know what the result is going to be. And we kind of extend this out a little bit as well into cloud as a single point of failure here. Most businesses, very understandably, are reluctant to put all their eggs in one basket, so to say. And one of the greatest benefits, or supposed benefits, of the cloud, and particularly public cloud, is meant to be the unrivaled levels of availability that you get, really as purely granted by the sheer power of the providers there, the size and scale of them. I will always urge a word of caution. We've learned before to our peril that there is no such thing as being too big to fail. It is something that you need to bear in mind. And I think when we look at spreading the load, this is perhaps why we start to see much more of an adoption towards hybrid IT models that are actually looking at utilizing multiple clouds and on-premises environments in some cases as well, just to give you that extra layer of security. But at the same time, that can add a layer of complexity to things as well. So how can we look to address that? Flexibility, really. Now, we're going to talk about testing in a couple of pieces here, so I'll just touch on this briefly for now. But the failover test facility within Zerto Virtual Replication that you might use to test in a DR scenario, use to prove compliance, generate reports for auditors, inspectors and things like that to show that you are protecting and able to recover workload swiftly. That same facility can also be used in the cloud to look at testing the workload performance there as well. So depending on how exactly you want to do this, you could, particularly as I say with Azure here, where you've got bidirectional replication available, you could look at actually putting it in as a production workload potentially if you want to, and just test it there temporarily, maybe run it for a day and see how the users find that. But whilst that's in there, as I say, we've got automatic reverse protection on that as well, so you'll still be able to protect that and bring everything back to your on-premises environment at the end of the day. If maybe you just want to step back and analyze it a little bit maybe you've discovered that that's not the right place for that workload. But you've got the flexibility to go in and out, and say to test these and to actually find out how your applications are going to perform in these environments before you fully commit to it. I mentioned as well there, a lot of businesses are not necessarily looking at a single cloud. With the 5.0 release actually that we did last year, we included the one-to-many replication feature. Now, what this does is this enables you to place any VM in up to 3 virtual protection groups, meaning that you can replicate that individual VM, or it might be a group of VMs, depending on how you set things up, to up to 3 different locations at a single time. And that's all simultaneous. You can also actually define individual SLAs for those as well. So you're looking at things like the retention period, maybe actually just the tiering for the application, depends how much of a priority it is as well. So you've got a lot of flexibility to use the right clouds for the right workloads in that respect. And really this all contributes to enabling real true hybrid cloud resilience. Resilience is all about really being protected while still being agile enough to be able to adapt to changes, be it within the market or the industry. And once we start to look at all of these particularly public cloud use cases, and actually I probably should have popped it on here as well. I mentioned earlier on, obviously we have a huge network of Zerto cloud service providers as well, managed service providers. Again, if you want to use a mix of managed service providers, public service providers, and again on-premises if you really want, that's absolutely possible. The combinations are almost endless in some respects here. And although I mentioned, as I say, this is up to 3 locations at the moment, this isn't a technical limit. It's something that we didn't want to swamp people with and give them too many choices. So it may well be that, as people look to broaden their horizons and start looking at utilizing more and more clouds, depending on how it suits different workloads, different applications, we'll look to extend that out as well. And so we'll just move on to that final barrier of confidence. And this is it is a big one. If you're not confident that something's going to work, it's going to be very difficult to actually commit to it. And I think the first real stumbling block here is the risk of prolonged unavailability or prolonged downtime, if we want to put it perhaps in a more simple way. We saw in that research again earlier on from Gartner and IDC in 451 that half of all migrations exceed their budget, the allotted time, and result in disruption to the business. And it's not just the unavailability of perhaps an application. That might be externally facing, it might be internally facing, but you've obviously got the lost productivity from all of your internal users at that point in time, and very high costs. They're just going to escalate. The more people that are out of action and are not contributing to the business as they normally would on a day-to-day basis, the higher those costs are going to spiral and the faster they're going to do so. And of course, we've just talked briefly about testing, but if you can't do that, you've got no guarantee of success. We saw a lot of people, even after they've gone through the planning for migration, have actually stopped it midway through the project because they don't have any guarantee of success. They can't actually commit to it because they don't know whether or not it will work. And when those risks perhaps outweigh the potential benefits of the project, they stop. It's that simple, really. And so confidence really is key. Perhaps the most important one here to look at is remaining protected during migrations, or in fact, no, we'll go with the top 2, remaining protected during migrations and keeping applications available to users. And this comes as really a consequence of the one-to-many feature again. So because we're able to allow simultaneous replication to multiple sites, you can have your applications in your let's call it site A, in your production workload, replicating out to your recovery site, there's site B. Well, simultaneously, you're also going to replicate those same workloads over to site C, your new site, where you're going to be shutting down. We're going to move from A to C. All of the time, whilst that information is replicating across, you can pre-seed as well, by the way, if you wanted to speed the process up. That's absolutely fine. You can certainly do that. But all the time, whilst that information is replicating across, your applications in production are still available to users. And they're not suffering any performance impact. Remember, we don't use snapshots. So there's no stun on any of the VMs there. So you shouldn't see any performance degradation at all. Sorry, excuse me. And this obviously gives you a huge amount of security. What this does as well is it really speeds up the process, because the downtime that you're going to experience from a move is limited to just the VM boot time. So what happens once you've got everything from site A replicated over to site C, they're both in sync, we're going to need to shut things down. Now, ZVR includes a move function very specifically for this, and what that will do is it will automate the full processes. As we discussed earlier, there's a lot of automation that's gone into the product to reduce the risk of manual errors and to remove a lot of the workload from you guys as well. And so, as I say, the move operation, once you start, will basically do a clean shutdown of all of the VMs. It will then resync just the last few seconds of changes. Remember, Zerto does continuous data protection, so we're replicating changes constantly every few seconds across the wire. We'll just sync up with those last few changes, and as soon as that's done, you'll be able to boot up the VMs. And as long as it takes them to boot, that's the amount of time that your applications are going to be inaccessible, usually limited to minutes. And as soon as it's ready, can simply bring everything back up in your new site. So I mentioned things like re-IP configuration is all automated for you as well. That can all be managed in the planning process beforehand. And of course, as I explained before there with the cloud, we have that testing and validation available for you as well. So there really is no reason to say, as we saw at the start, that 100% of migrations are a pain in the ass. Really, 100% of migrations should be successful and can be successful when they're actually approached in the right way. So that was really what we were going to look at in terms of the barriers, and I say the 4 C's there: compatibility, complexity, choice, and confidence. But what we want to do now is we'll actually just show you a customer example where this is actually going to focus largely around the consolidations and also the acquisition side of things. We were unfortunately hoping to have this customer with us today, but that they actually had some other commitments, so aren't able to join us on the call, which is a real shame. And unfortunately, as a consequence of that, I am going to have to do this anonymously. So there have been a few bits and pieces that I've had to tweak and take out of here. Hopefully it won't be too obvious, but we are actually working on looking at doing some official case studies and write-ups with this customer as well at the moment, so you'll be able to see a little bit more on this, I think, in future as well. So just to start out and talk a little bit about this customer, they started out as a US company but are now global. They, as you can see, they provide local, national and global supply chain solutions. They've received numerous awards for growth, innovation, general service, quite frankly. And they've really grown hugely in a very short space of time. As you can see, they really had revenues of $250 million in 2013. Today they're worth over $15 billion, so a real huge growth there. And how have they achieved that? It's basically been done through an acquisition strategy. So as I mentioned, there are a lot of businesses do choose to grow through acquisitions. These guys did it very quickly. They actually made 7 acquisitions in 24 months, and they continued to rapidly acquire after that as well. When they started out, they had just 1 data center. And by the end of this, they ended up at over 21 data centers, and this is just in the US as well, in North America. So obviously 21 data centers, huge physical footprint there, very inefficient, lots of really spread out workloads, Not ideal for any business at all. They did actually already have some investment in SRM and recover point, but they actually eliminated any sort of array-based replication from the migration project due to the requirements and costs of, in particular, getting similar arrays to each location. So as we talked about that hardware dependency, and particularly at the storage level earlier on, the cost that's associated with bringing every site up to a matching spec, that was enough to put these guys off. And we'll talk ever so slightly more on that specific point on the next slide as well. They actually purchased Zerto just to do the migrations initially, largely because it was storage and compute agnostic, gave them a lot of freedom and flexibility. But as soon as they started using the licenses, they realized, a lot of the other features in the product, and obviously, as I mentioned, the core part of it being DR, actually looking at the level of protection that they could afford to their applications, that they realized very, very quickly that it was far, far better to them to actually be holding full licenses for Zerto Virtual Replication and actually enable them to do the migrations and then to subsequently protect them as well. So they've really grown with us as well over this space of time here. Now, I mentioned obviously that the array-based replication was eliminated from the planning stages for these guys. Now, they did actually do 2 consolidations all the way back in 2013 with array-based replication or SAN replication. They had a lot of problems with it. It was extremely expensive for them. As we said, they needed to actually bring the storage up to scratch, match that in both locations, and it also didn't operate at, as they term it, their speed, or the customer's speed in this case. In addition to that, they also needed an appliance at every point of consolidation as well. Again, we mentioned earlier on, looking at occasionally you do need to actually purchase additional physical appliances to enable this. Obviously, that was something that they didn't want to continue doing. We talked as well about the need to have the same version of your virtualization platform in all of these sites as well. And again, these guys experienced just that problem, looking at having to actually upgrade vSphere to a matching version number in every one of their sites was too much for them to contemplate. They were obviously very reliant upon the SAN technology provider at this point as well. Having that lock-in is not ideal. Businesses have been moving away from the level of physical technology lock-in on-premise, moving into the cloud. At Zerto, we like flexibility, as you might have gathered. We don't like to see people locked in, and we like to enable choice. And that was a real key point for this customer as well. See, the length of time for the migrations was not ideal for them. And the other side of that was, of course, in order to limit the disruption to productivity and to the users, they had to do all of this out of hours as well. So you've got a lot of additional expense for your FTEs just actually looking at overtime there, and obviously just the hassle of that. Nobody really wants to be working overnight to be able to complete migrations. So obviously for them, Zerto was a brilliant solution, really helped them. They had a fantastic, easy installation. It was up and running within an hour. And they had the ability to actually start their migrations within a couple of hours beyond that as well. So very, very quick implementation there. So we mentioned they looked actually at expanding beyond the migration use case and looking at the DR functionality as well once they've completed the migration. They love the fact that they've got the ability to roll back in time through those application consistent checkpoints, which, as I mentioned, was really a consequence of leveraging the VPG functionality, making sure that everything has right order fidelity and is able to be brought back up consistently. Their ability to actually migrate huge amounts of data, sort of more than a terabyte, very, very quickly was very, very important for them as well. We talked about the agnosticity of the product here as well, in terms of removing all of the physical dependencies. The ability to actually test these migrations as well as their failovers, as I mentioned, The test failover facility is used in a DR context for compliance purposes in a lot of occasions as well, so this is something that this customer does. But it also enables them to actually carry out their migrations in the daytime. So rather than everyone having to stay after and work late into the night or even all through the night, the company are actually able now to do migrations during lunchtime. So they'll, if they're planning something, they'll say to their users, this is going to go on, we need an hour, you can all go to lunch at X, Y, Z time. The users will disappear, they'll carry out the migration. By the time everyone gets back from lunch, everything is back up and running in the new site and accessible for them there. So really, really powerful from that point of view. And actually one thing I haven't really touched on too much is looking at bandwidth requirements and the WAN optimization, again built in with ZVR. This was actually very important for them, and there's a particular feature, the throttling capability as well here, that was very valid for one of the consolidations they did. They had a company out on the west coast of the US they'd acquired. That business actually just had a 25 meg shared connection, but they needed to replicate out 100 terabytes of data. So the way that they achieved this without really causing any disruption at all was to use the throttling to limit the bandwidth use during a certain time frame. So basically during the operations during the day from 9 to 5, the replication bandwidth is throttled and restricted so that all production traffic will take priority. As soon as you're outside of hours there and everyone else has gone home, that bandwidth is freed up. And automatically Zerto will start making the most of that and use it as much as possible, as much as available to replicate that data out as quickly as possible. So there are a huge number of benefits outside of just the migrations as well there that were brought to the company. So we see quick summary here, really quick and more predictable with less risk to migrations, all of that level of automation that's been brought into this, reducing the risk of manual error and corruptions and things really, really helps to speed things up and also, yeah, to make it more predictable and to give you a lot more confidence. Obviously, the consolidation project in and of itself resulted in massive savings for the business and a great deal of optimization across it as well. They now have, because of course they've gone from using the migration licenses to having full Zerto Virtual Replication licenses, they've got complete flexibility to move data centers as and when they need now. They can do this anytime. And obviously, as we talked about just a moment ago with the sort of bandwidth throttling there, they're not limited by the time of day that they're doing with that either. They've got much, much lower admin overhead. It's far, far more simple to manage. I haven't really spoken much about the simplicity in terms of like the user interface and actually how you interact with the software today, but it really is incredibly simple, and particularly when you compare it to the solution that these guys were using previously. As I say, it was a combination of RecoverPoint and SRM. Zerto has really helped them a huge amount there. Actually, I'll come back to that point in just a moment as well. As we say, enabling applications to be moved in instead of whole data centers is yet another benefit of the virtual protection groups. Instead of having to move a whole site, you can selectively move specific workloads and to different locations as well. So you've got a great chance to actually optimize I suppose the distribution of all your workloads there as well, or to selectively migrate, shall we say, to do it over time. You might not want to move everything all at once. You might perhaps want to do this over the course of a few weeks and actually spread it out a little bit more, and it's very, very easy to do that. And of course this allowed for more focused operations elsewhere. And just sort of really twigging on that bit and going back to the admin point there, prior to using Zerto Virtual Replication, the administrator at this customer who actually ran all of the disaster recovery stuff, he spent 40 to 50% of his full-time hours maintaining SRM and RecoverPoint. There's a huge amount of time spent just to maintain that one solution. As soon as Zerto was installed, this was reduced incredibly. A huge amount of work taken away from this guy, and he was basically able to focus on looking at the migration projects rather than looking at, making sure that everything is protected. They had the confidence in Zerto to know that it was being protected, and the simplicity, the visibility to know that everything was being taken care of, and they didn't have to put that level of time into managing it. And as I say, the guy helped out a huge amount there with looking at this larger migration project. Perhaps ironically, we almost, I don't know if we didn't do him a favor or did do him a favor at the end of this. See, as he's not got so much to focus on in the DR side of things, and the migration project started to come to a conclusion there. I can't say this for certain. Maybe the guy was wondering what on earth he was actually going to have left to do for the business. Maybe he did actually run out of work. I'm not entirely sure. What I do know is that he actually came to work for us instead. So the administrator who was previously managing this project and all of the DR beforehand is now one of our senior systems engineers out on the East Coast as well. So it's really nice for us actually to see that a user has been so enthused with the product that they've also actually come over to our side of the fence and joined us here too. And just looking at how Zerto has evolved with this customer as well. As we said, they started out using it for migration, very quickly realized the benefits of all of the DR capabilities, the ability to do failover in the daytime, to be able to shift individual applications and to be able to do that at any time of day. They've also more recently actually, although I understand, I'm not sure they've actually had to use it luckily, but they really love the journal facility and the ability to recover from ransomware. So if you've not seen any of our ransomware content before, we've got plenty available. There's some resources on the website. We've also got some other webinars on the subject, but just very, very briefly, because obviously Zerto is a continuous data protection project, we're constantly replicating information across, we're storing checkpoints every few seconds in the journal at the recovery site. You're able to rewind and recover to any one of those checkpoints, which makes recovering from ransomware very, very easy, almost completely non-disruptive. We have other customers that use the software regularly to recover from ransomware infections, recurrent ransomware infections, to the point where actually their users have no idea that they've ever been infected. It's that quick. Once you've got sort of the process down of actually identifying that you've been infected, the process of recovering from it is insanely fast with Zerto, which is great. And of course, looking at moving forward into sort of more of, I suppose, the analytics side of things, they've been looking at utilizing a lot of our APIs as well for custom reporting. These can be sort of emailed onto senior managers and things like this as well. So it really takes a lot of the stress out of some of the day-to-day work for the guys as well. And then last bit for this today, the future plans for the business. They actually I think it was last year, possibly the year before, acquired a large business in Europe. So they have pretty much the same project as they've just completed within the US, now running over here as well. So this has started actually. As you can see, it's 26 data centers, I think, in total. And they're actually going to try and shrink that down from somewhere between 3 to 5. They have begun. I'm sure that will be completed very, very quickly, and I suspect that we'll probably do some more coverage of this particular story as well once it is complete. And so, with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are really up to the end of today. So I just wanted to leave you here with this this web of IT resilience, as I've taken to calling this. Everything we've discussed today is just a part of IT resilience, and all of the security, say the protection and the confidence that you get with Zerto Virtual Replication. You can find out a lot more about this. Obviously, if you want to go online, you've got access to our website, the resources pages on there. You can find all kinds of documentation, some of our previous videos and other webinars that are available. Or of course, if you're more interested in seeing something a little bit hands-on, you can by all means contact us directly. We are 100% channel focused though, so if you do work with one of our, where are we? I think we're up to about 1,500 odd partners worldwide now. If you do work with any of them, they'll be able to help you with getting a demo. You can speak to your rep there, or you can pop onto our website and request it with us there as well. And of course, we'll put you in touch with someone who's the right person to speak to. So think we've just got a couple of moments left for some questions. I've actually only got one in the box at the moment. Do we work with Oracle Public Cloud? I'm afraid not at the moment, no. We are constantly looking at developing and expanding out the support for particularly for public cloud providers at the moment as well. By all means, if there's a particular reason you're looking at Oracle Public Cloud, I guess get in touch with a rep at Zerto as well, talk to them a little bit about what your needs are, and we can have a chat with you as well and see how we can help you out with that. But as that seems to be it for today, ladies and gentlemen, I will say thank you very much for joining us. So if you do have any other questions that crop up later on in the day, you're more than welcome to get in touch with me anytime. As I said, my name is Keith Taylor. You can email me just at keith@zerto.com. As I say, I'm more than happy to take any questions and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. But I hope you've enjoyed the session today. I hope it's been informative for you. And please join us next month. It will probably be a week earlier, our regular series. We actually got a little bit put out of sync for our 5. launch in August. But we'll be trying to shift back to the first Thursday of every month from now on. So please join us then. You can sign up on our website as usual. All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone. And I'll leave you to the rest of your days. Take care.